Welcome, everyone, to this discussion of the promise and use of technology in the care of people living with dementia and their caregivers. I'm Jay Ingram, your host for the event. Age Well is Canada's technology and aging network, one of the national centers of excellence. Age Well researchers are working on a diverse range of topics, from technologies, as we'll discuss today, through best practices to policies, all to improve quality of life for older adults and caregivers. That's primary, but also to generate social and economic benefits for Canada. Today's session is, of course, part of Age Well's Technology Innovation Week, which I hope many of you have been following. If you're like me and you keep track of trends in Alzheimer's research, even loosely, you know that much more attention is paid to identifying exactly how Alzheimer's disease progresses and to identify stages during that progress where it can be interrupted by medication. These are incredibly important research efforts, but the benefits might be years in the future. While right now there is a way of helping people living with dementia, technology. It kind of flies under the radar, but we're going to be talking today about what's called Dementia Tech. Now, if you're thinking helpful robots, it is that, but it's much more as well. There's an incredible array of technologies that can make a difference. Just before we get to those and meet our panel, a couple of comments. We encourage all Age Tech Innovation Week participants to engage actively using the Zoom chat function. Interactions are monitored and the event code of conduct is posted on the Whova app. This presentation will be recorded and made available on Age Well's YouTube channel and the event website. We encourage all Age Tech Innovation Week participants to engage actively using the Zoom chat function. Interactions are monitored and the code of conduct, as I mentioned, is posted in the Whova app. And we acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands our speakers live in today. And we do this seriously, not offhandedly, to reaffirm our commitment to improve relationships between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We encourage you to reflect on the land on which you're located, your relationship to the land, and especially to the people who are the traditional keepers of that land. We invite you to review the full land acknowledgement specific to Age Well on the Whova app. Now, we have a great panel today. I'm going to introduce them briefly now and leave it to them to be more specific if they wish. Dr. Allison Sakular is Vice President of Research at Baycrest Health Sciences. Dr. Thomas Shepopolis is Research Chair in Aging and Health and Professor of Psychology, University of Regina. Ms. Karen Lead, Vice Chair of the Age Well Older Adult and Caregiver Advisory Committee. And Dr. Frank Knuffel, physician at the Bruyere Memory Program in Ottawa. I think all of you, panel, I think our audience has an idea of the importance of dementia and the difficulties associated with caring for people who live with it, but sometimes the scale of the issue isn't well understood. And I just want to say, before I come to you, it's hard to think of dementia as an impending medical crisis when we're in the middle of COVID, but the numbers in Canada and worldwide are staggering. So we're talking today, not just about today's challenges, but especially how those will intensify in the future and how technology might provide some help in this. I know there's tremendous variety in the ways technology can be applied, so I'd like to go around the panel to get each person's take on their particular interest in technology and its application to dementia. Allison Sakular, could we start with you, please?
Sure, happy to start. And Jay, great to be here with you, and thanks to everyone for being here for this panel. The other role that I have, in addition to being the Vice President of Research at Baycrest, is I run the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, which is a solution accelerator that's aimed at getting the best solutions that address issues of aging and brain health into the hands of people who need them as quickly as possible. And really, we have a very strong focus on dementia. And whereas a lot of other groups might focus on drug development and other kinds of things, we really think it's important, Jay, as you've said, to make sure that we're bringing technologies into people's homes, into long-term care homes, into memory clinics, and so on, so that we can address people's needs as quickly as possible. And among the kinds of solutions that we're seeing, some are technologies, others are not. But one of the things that's been really interesting is during the pandemic, we've seen a real interest in taking up more of these technologies. People are becoming more accustomed to doing things virtually, doing things on Zoom. So we're seeing a lot of interest in the community for virtual reality sorts of products, for sensors in people's homes, for remote tracking devices of different kinds of sorts, robots, as we mentioned before, and social robots, robots to help people around the house, as well as all kinds of artificial intelligence devices. And we also are seeing a lot of interest in some of the early detection systems. So you mentioned, there's a lot of work at trying to develop, for example, blood tests to say, when do you get dementia early? Well, you can also tell when someone's getting dementia early by seeing how their pattern of behavior is changing, or seeing how their vision is changing, or their brain patterns are changing by doing MRI. So some of the companies we work with, for example, Darmian, can look at your brain scan, and they say that they can tell 10 years before you have any memory symptoms that you're headed down the path toward dementia. So we're really interested in things that can help us prevent dementia altogether. So solutions for that. We're interested in things that can help to detect it as early as possible so we can put the right interventions in place. And of course, to care for people with dementia. And the last thing I just want to mention is we're also really interested in making sure that we're addressing the needs, not just of the people living with dementia, but their caregivers. Because people may not know, but people who care for folks who have dementia are more likely to get dementia themselves. And it's not because it's contagious, it's because they have all of these other increased risk factors. So we want to make sure that we remember the caregivers in all of these sorts of equations. So I'll stop there and leave it to others to continue.
Thank you, Allison. I think it'd be appropriate to ask Karen Lead to speak now, because she has a lot of experience with caregivers and as a caregiver herself. Karen.
Thank you. Yes, my mom developed or was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at the age of 57, and that was in 2000. And then my father passed away 14 months after, and then she came to live with me full time. I had a newborn at the time, so I'm the definition of an informal sandwich generation caregiver, or I was for a period of 20 years. My mom passed early 2020. And this topic is extremely important because, yeah, there was not any technology to help me during that process. And, AgeWell does work on these innovative products, including smart home monitoring, which I probably could have very well benefited because I was still working. And although I hired a live-in caregiver, it would have helped me at least alleviate some of the stress, being able to monitor from work or wherever I was. Also, another innovative use that is coming up with AgeWell as well is the medication monitoring, where a team of professionals could monitor medications, and that information could be shed, because when you're caregiving in your home, you become sort of like a mini nursing home. And so you are in a sense like the one-man show. So you're like a human resource department. You're also monitoring, you become a nurse. You're monitoring several people, even though maybe you're not paying several people. You have to monitor personal support workers, doctors, nurses, and occupational therapists. A lot of things that encompass caring for somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia in your home. And what I'd like to see more so is palliative care, because end of life is not really so much researched, which ironically I'm doing my dissertation on that, because we tend to not realize that this is a long disease. It could be short to long. There's not really a defined term when you have dementia. And so assistance for caregivers that are helping people towards the end of life would also be beneficial.
Thank you very much, Karen. Boy, with you and Allison already, we have so many things to talk about. But Dr. Shepopolis, could you give us your perspective on this, please?
Well, I've been doing research in Alzheimer's disease and dementia for well over 30 years. I bet you can't tell because of my youthful good looks, but it's been a very long time. And one of the most difficult truths to accept that I believe to be true is that over the course of our lifetime, we're not going to see any major solutions, any cures for Alzheimer's disease come from the health sciences. We have made very little progress and there are no breakthroughs. The good side, I guess the good news is that I have been tremendously impressed with what technology can do to solve problems related to dementia. Just a basic example of a self-driving vehicle that can be tracked could make a big difference in letting people with dementia be independent and go to destinations and do what they need to do. My own work focuses on pain. People with dementia in long-term care have very frequent pain problems. Prevalence is estimated as high as 90%, and yet these problems are not identified, and we have well-documented evidence of undertreatment of pain. We know how to identify pain, but facilities don't have the human resources to do it. Our work focuses on developing computer vision algorithms designed to identify pain behaviors, valid pain behaviors, as people go about their daily routines. And then we have developed other methods as well, apps and that kind of thing. So that's my focus, is better pain care for people with dementia who suffer unnecessarily from pain that can be treated.
Oh, thank you. We'll dig into that a little deeper as well. But Frank Knuffel, didn't mean to leave you last. It's just the way it rolled out. But could you give us your perspective, please?
Thank you, Jay, and thank you for having me on this panel. I'm a physician in care of the elderly, and I've been providing medical care to older adults for 30 years. And over the last 15 years, I have been looking to technology on how we can improve care and facilitate aging in place using technology in the home. And when I think about sort of the continuum of cognitive loss, because it is a continuum, there's sort of, healthy aging, where we lose a little bit of our memory, and then there's mild cognitive impairment, and then there's dementia, of course, the most severe. So just as we move along that continuum, there's going to be role for technology in different ways. So it's not like dementia technology is going to solve everything. What we do is we have to look for how can technology help us along that journey. And so one of the things I think technology can help us with is diagnosis. So we can use technology. We already use a lot of technology, but very expensive technology like MRIs and PET scans and the like. But can we use cheaper technology to help with diagnosis? So that's one space. After that, it's monitoring. Can we monitor the progression of cognitive decline using technology? And then I think where the near future is going to be is, how can we actually provide feedback to both the person living with the cognitive impairment or dementia, but also to care providers, health professionals, and other people that are sort of in that circle of care. So that's how I think of technology being able to help us in the spectrum of dementia.
Oh, thank you very much, Frank. I have a question to kick this off for all of you, risking the confusion that Zoom can interject in this. But I'm wondering about inertia or hesitancy to use technology. And I'll give you an example. I wear hearing aids. These are supposedly quite sophisticated instruments. I only use them to hear. I don't use any of the other, they've even got AI in them. And I just sort of go as far as it copes with my hearing loss, and that's it. I'm not really interested in going forward. And I'm just wondering if, when talking to either to caregivers mostly, I guess, but families, do you encounter any resistance toward the introduction of technology into the picture of care?
Yes. Should we just jump in, Jay, or do you want to?
Please, yeah.
I'll just kick it off by saying absolutely yes. Although I think that is diminishing a little bit because of COVID. If there's one silver lining from COVID, it's that people are a little bit more open to new technologies and willing to try new things. But for example, in some of the work that we've done, trying to sort of test out, say, social robots in people's homes, there are a lot of concerns around privacy. So for the social robot to be able to interact with you well, it has to be able to see your face and understand what you're saying. That data has to go somewhere. And so there's a lot of concern around privacy issues. And even I imagine, Thomas, in the work that you're doing with machine vision, it's the same kind of thing. Anything with machine vision is looking into your world. And so there's always these privacy issues that come up there. And then part of it also is just making sure that, you know, when people have hearing aids, for example, or other kinds of devices that they're using, often those devices are designed without consulting the people who are going to be using them in the end. And so they might have all these extra things in them that people don't want or need. It might be more complex, might be too hard to see. So I just want to stress how important it is for innovators to be sure that they're not designing for people, but they're designing by and with people. So, I mean, one great example is the Day-to-Day program. That was a project that was developed by support from AgeWell and then follow-on support from CABI, which actually meets some of these things that Frank was talking about, where he's talking about needing to monitor ongoing issues. And what Dr. Arlene Askell did when she was at Ontario Shores and is now continuing at UHN, she worked with people with dementia to figure out what are the issues that you're facing and what do you feel is changing when you're progressing. And all of that now is encompassed in an app that can track people's cognition and their mood and their daily activities, and it's fed directly to caregivers who can then intervene early, right? So that's just one example. She never would have had that kind of success if she hadn't put older people and caregivers right at the center of the innovation. That's really key, I think, for acceptance of these sorts of new technologies.
It's super important too, right? Although it does, of course, expand the amount of work that has to be done, but there's no point in doing this in a way that isn't going to be used. Thomas, Allison mentioned your work on face recognition. Do you find the same kind of maybe initial reluctance?
Well, the privacy issue for sure is raised all the time. Our system, although it involves cameras, it is designed to not record nor display any information. So we always make that very clear. It processes the information, it processes the image, but that's not recorded and it's not displayed. It's just looking for facial responses. And when a threshold of facial responses is crossed, then the nurses are notified. So that's how that works. But I also wanted to add that our work focuses largely on implementation at long-term care facilities, not at homes. So we do find resistance there as well, which is a little bit different in nature than the resistance you might see in an individual home or in a family. There is systemic resistance to any kind of change because that could require a radical restructuring on how things are done. And that's why I think implementation plans are important that engage everyone. And also, my final point, even when it comes to something as simple as using an app to facilitate what nurses would otherwise do on paper, some facilities don't have good enough Wi-Fi. So there is even those technical issues that are independent of our technology that make our technology less reliable. So to summarize, there are different challenges in a facility level in terms of resistance that you might see in a home or a family.
I'd like to quickly follow up on that, but Frank first. Frank or Karen, do you have any comments on that initial point about people's reluctance or inertia toward using new technologies?
Yeah, my question more was kind of, I'm personalizing it because my mom lost her speech early on. Well, first it was aphasia, and then she lost her speech. And even in speaking with some caregivers, some people that are diagnosed often perhaps lose they revert back to their mother tongue, and then there's a language issue with the caregiver and obviously the loved one. And so how would I'm just curious on how that would help in that situation if you cannot communicate with the person that has dementia.
Answers from anybody? Suggestions?
I mean, there's different sorts of approaches, I guess, that you can take. And one is, I mean, Thomas mentioned one, which is using, systems that can maybe read people's emotions on their faces. You can also tell someone's in pain, for example, by reading their brain waves. There's some work out of MIT using the Interaxon Muse that has successfully been able to say when someone's in pain versus not. And I think that's something really worth exploring. So there's different ways that you can use those, but then there's also other kinds of communication devices. So sometimes people can communicate not necessarily by speaking, but by writing or by having pictures. And there's a wonderful innovator who's got an innovation named Lingo, which is trying to sort of help people who can't speak as well communicate by creating their own vocabulary of pictures, for example, that's meaningful to them and meaningful to the caregivers. So Lingo, that kind of solution I think is really useful. So there's a lot of other cases in addition to dementia that cause these kinds of communication issues. So what's happening now is people are looking at, well, what happens with folks with autism or folks who've had different kinds of strokes, and how can we adapt those solutions to this other area? So that's where some of these really cool innovations are coming from.
Frank, I'd like to get your comments, if you have some, on the reluctance to embrace new technologies, but I'd like to wrap it up with a comment or question that Thomas raised in my mind, which is, if the situations in long-term care homes are significantly different, as I guess we all kind of implicitly think they are, from the home, does that imply that you have to almost have two streams of technology? One kind that is applicable in long-term care, one kind that is applicable in the home?
Thanks, Jay, for the two questions. So I'll start with the first one, which is sort of my reflections and my experience actually with patients every day at my clinic and their families. My first observation is that when you're a caregiver of someone with dementia, like Karen demonstrated really well, it's a 24/7 job, and you really don't have a lot of time to be sort of searching for solutions, if you even think there is a solution available. So that's the first thing I would say, is that you don't have time, you don't know where to start. And so that's a challenge. I think the next thing is sort of the fear of the unknown, and it includes, that privacy question, the complexity question, like I have a hard time navigating through my phone. How am I ever going to figure out how to manage a smart home and sensors and that kind of thing? So that's another piece. And then I think that there's really the privacy was mentioned, but I think it really, after that, it's cost. People are also worried about, how am I going to afford this, and how much does how much does it cost? Is there a upfront fee, then a monthly fee? Like how does it work? So I think those are the things that people sort of mentioned to me in the clinic. Now to go back to your second question. So just like different technologies are going to be appropriate for different stages in cognitive decline. I think that, you know, the technologies certainly will have to be adapted to the environment. So actually, we're just right now doing a project where we've taken the home monitoring technology that was in part sponsored by CABI, thank you very much, and where we took a technology that was meant to monitor nighttime wandering of people with dementia in the home, where the caregiver, you know, every time the bed moved, they were afraid that their loved one would wander out into the street. And so we needed to develop a technology that would cue the person with dementia to go back to bed without disturbing the caregiver and allowing them to sleep, so that the next day they could be, you know, a more refreshed caregiver and have a better next day. So we did it, we tested it in a number of homes. And then, you know, we said, well, that's great that this works in single homes, but can this work in a retirement home setting? And, you know, what would that look like? And the requirements, of course, of 1 or 2 nighttime staff in a retirement home are very different from the requirements of a partner that's trying to sleep through the night. So, of course, we've just put this system in a retirement home with the help of private sector partners and Carleton University, of course, to test this in an institutional setting. So I believe that, you know, if you identify the problem or the challenge, and it's unique at home and it's unique, you know, or different in an institutional setting, but the wandering is a common thread. It's a late stage disease, and so it's a common thing. So, but you still have to adapt it to each of the environments.
Jay, can I just jump in really quick, because in the chat, Francis Morton Chang and Zara Amarshi have raised some really interesting issues around language and culture. And to Frank's point, just following on that, it's so important to make sure that the devices, these technologies that are being developed and implemented, are paying attention to the fact that different groups have different needs. And in fact, in the case of dementia, you know, folks, you know, of Indigenous heritage or from the Black community often are more at risk for a whole bunch of reasons than people who are, you know, white upper middle class professionals living in downtown Toronto. And we need to make sure that there's a not just sort of the appropriate cultural implementations as there might be in terms of, say, changing the way that you're approaching something for Indigenous elders, for example. And there's a lot of work that's happening there. Carrie Barassa and others are doing work in that space. But also making sure that back to the point that Thomas and Frank had made before, that there's accessibility for these devices or technologies, because, you know, there's some really cool social robots that cost, you know, $10,000 a piece. They're going to make a difference in people's lives, but in the lives of people who need them the least. So we need to do everything we can to make sure that the people who need these technologies, the devices the most, are able to access them, and that we've got the infrastructure in place. We have the costing assessed in a way that really puts them in the hands of people who need them the most, and is going to address their specific needs, because the needs are going to be different depending on your language, depending on your culture, depending on your country. So I just wanted to get my rant out there a little bit early, in case, so because it was brought up by some of the commenters who are watching. So I just want to make sure we are watching the comments, and I think it's really important that equity is a key sort of thread through all of this.
I just want to pursue the idea of acceptance of new technology just for a little bit more before we get into some specific examples. And we've talked, I think it's fair to say, mostly about how technology will help caregivers, like monitoring the movements of somebody with dementia. How much thought and design has to go into taking into account the acceptance by the person with dementia of these technologies? And that's an open question to anyone, please.
Well, I mean, the answer is a lot, but it also depends on the technology. If the technology is something that will help the person with dementia, such as sensors so that they can stay longer in their home, or something along those lines, or reminders on their phone, that's extremely important. In our case, our technology primarily is directed to individuals who would not have the ability to use the technology directly and would not even be aware that the technology is being used due to very severe impairment. So in those cases, the acceptance effort should be focused on caregivers, both professional and family member caregivers. So it's important, but it also depends on the technology and in terms of how this should be done and to whom the effort toward acceptance should be directed.
Yeah, it also depends on the stage of dementia. I mean, so, early on, even through, the early stages of late dementia, people living with dementia are perfectly capable of making decisions for themselves. But there may be some cases where it's gotten to the point, it's progressed the disease to the point where there's someone who's appointed basically as a decision maker. In those cases, when we're doing research with these individuals, we still always try to get consent and have discussions with the people living with dementia first, because they might have good days and bad days. So I think it's always really important to make sure that they're aware, because you don't want things being done to them. They want to be part of the solution. But there are cases, unfortunately, where it's gotten to the point where they're not able to consistently make those decisions, and then you do need to bring in the caregivers.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that just to say that from us, we have patients and caregivers on an advisory council that gives us direction for all of our research, and we have a beautiful partnership between engineering and health science, so that and others, but that we make sure that it's always balanced, that it's neither a wonderful technological solution that doesn't work in a dementia context, or that we're trying to address solutions to problems that don't exist. So for sure, what we do is we sort of design something in the engineering lab to see if it works. Then we bring it to the hospital to try it on a couple of people just to make sure that, how do they respond to it? And then we actually test it in people's homes. So we did that sequence. Certainly that's what we do. And all along the way, it's all about it's really person-centered design and application that, for these, and that's the way it should be. And as we've said all along, there's so many variables in the stages of cognitive impairment, but individuals remain individuals, and we all respond differently. And so in one of the devices that we use, it uses a speaker to cue the person, but we have the family record the message. We don't use a Siri voice or an Alexa voice. We have the family record a message, and there's no one other than the loved one that would know exactly under these circumstances what's the best thing to say. So we'll customize that, record that, and then have the system provide that message.
Hey, Karen, you spent, as you said, 20 years caring for your mom. Over that time, yes. I'd just like to get a sense of what kind of technologies that are feasible, that maybe this group is already working on, would have been the biggest help for you.
Definitely, as I mentioned, the smart home monitoring, because of course, at the beginning stages, she used to wander and, literally just leave. And so I had to, I just improvised. So I got ADT, so at least I could hear the beeping of the door. So essentially it was sort of like creating an environment without having the tools, like just common sense. So that definitely, as I mentioned earlier, some form of space where all of the care plans could be in one spot, so that, because anytime someone new is coming, it's going over that care plan with each individual person, and that was laborious. So something that just is one-stop shopping, I guess, where it's all essential and it's like everyone's sort of involved. So you have input from, when you have the appointments with the doctor, and input from like a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, so that everyone involved in that person's care. The team of people that you're creating just goes there. So you're not constantly, being the one going through this time and time again. So that would have been very helpful.
So those are both maybe primarily time-saving devices, but would they have given you emotional support as well?
No, so that's a very good point. There needs to be some sort of counseling that caregivers have access to that's not prohibitive, because a lot of people do tend, I was fortunate or unfortunate, whatever you want to say, but I worked full time and I had to hire a caregiver that was 8 hours a day, but that you don't get a break. As you say, essentially you leave one job and you clock into another, or some people are doing this full time without pay. And there needs to be some sort of ability to balance your life. And what I call, because it's not mentioned a lot, and there's a living grief that you deal with when you have a loved one with dementia, and nobody talks about it. So, I'm dealing with that now, where I was, cognizant enough to get bereavement counseling when my mom was in palliative. So preparing myself. However, you're as I said, you're dealing with living grief up until the person moves on, and then it resets to actual grief. So it's sort of helping somebody maybe that just helps you with, navigating the experience. Somebody that, okay, I've been through this. This is what you need to do. Speak to this person. I think that would be probably beneficial. Some sort of living document that gives someone a resources of, hey, have you tried this? It's not necessarily like a sponsorship, but something that could probably assist. That would probably be beneficial.
Yeah. And there's things like iGeriCare, which are free resources that probably came out, maybe Karen, after you were dealing with it. I can put the link in the chat. But even closer to home where you are in Calgary, there's a group called UQuest. Jay, I don't know if you know about them, but they were developed because for folks with young onset dementia, it's even harder to find sort of groups of people who have caregivers who understand what you're going through. And there's even different kinds of stressors that are put on when someone who might have been the primary person earning money for the family all of a sudden can't work. And then not only does that person have to resign from his or her job, but their caregiver does as well. So UQuest is another way of bringing people together.
I also wanted to mention, because I did mention earlier the sandwich part. So I think that's another area that needs to exist, where that support of how do you balance parenting and this full-time job as your mother's or father's or loved one's caregiver, and hope that you're not taking from either side, right? So that also is a big one, as people are getting, as you mentioned, my mom was 57, so it was early onset. So something like that, where there is sort of, I guess, phases of the disease where you could kind of basically do it, beginning, middle, late, and palliative, because I think, I guess there's 4, I would say, main phases of support system that should be kind of encompassed.
Yeah, I can't help but think of my own father, who was in his mid-90s, caring for his wife of 70 years, who was more or less unresponsive. And, it was the right thing. It was the thing for him to do. This was his companion. But boy, in the mid-90s, that was pretty tough to watch. I'm cognizant of the amount of time we have left, and I've still got this thing about concrete examples in my mind. So what I'd like to do is again go around the panel And even if you've addressed as a couple, like Thomas, you have, and Frank, you have two specific technologies, if you could identify, either build on that description you've already given us and give us a sense of where you hope it will go. And that really applies to you too, Karen. And Allison, if you could pick one of your many technologies that you're involved in, just to give us all a sense of, here's where we are, this is what we're working on, here's what we'd like to see in the next 5 or 10 years. And anyone can start, or if you wish, I can name somebody. Frank.
Great, I don't have to go last again. That would be a really hard position to be in. So I think if you think about what we really want out of life is to be able to function independently as long as possible. And of course, if we can do that at home, that would be perfect, right? So it's that independence and functioning. So what we've started to look at a little bit more closely is different activities of daily living, and to use them look at those from a monitoring point of view initially, which is to say, what activities are you still performing? Are you still performing them well, like making a meal, that kind of thing? And looking in the next maybe 5 years to 10 years into queuing systems, right? On how to communicate that, whoops, missed a little step there, well, let's go back and fix that so that, the outcome is still good. So, we're looking at activities of daily living that way in the home, the essential ones, right? Preparing a meal and, maintaining hygiene, that kind of thing. The second domain is driving. We haven't talked at all about driving today, but driving is huge. It's huge for independence. It's huge for self-esteem. Being independently driving in a country like Canada is a huge ticket item. So unfortunately, with progressive cognitive decline, there comes a time when driving is no longer safe with the current technology. So there's a whole set of work that needs to be done about assistive driving technologies, right, which are starting to come out with a number of cars like Tesla and then a lot of other cars as well. But we need to figure out how we're going to transition, because there are going to be some semi-autonomous vehicles on the road with some not so autonomous vehicles on the road. The ones we're most comfortable with are the ones with the least amount of technology, right? Because those are the ones we drove early on and that we still remember everything about. But so how do we adapt to the new technology? How do we use that technology? There's driving simulators, and so there's lots to do in that space. So I'm not going to take up more time, but just to say that activities of daily living and driving, I think, are going to be places where there's going to be a lot of work over the next little while.
And are the manufacturers of self-driving cars aware of the needs of people that might have incipient or early dementia?
I would say that probably not to my level of comfort. I think that, right now it's still about the coolest technology and not the most user-friendly interface, right? So, even like a Tesla, if you think about it, right, having one screen that controls everything, that's really cool for a techie. But for someone that's used to turning knobs in 5 different places, that reaches down and goes, this is where the temperature switch is, that reaches over here and says, this is where my headlights are, right? That is going to be, it's going to be challenging. So we need to and I think this is going to be a growing field over the next little while, is if we want people to remain mobile and independently transporting themselves to places, we do need to figure out how we can increase the intelligence of the vehicle, but also how do we keep people that need it the most, how do we keep them able to use it?
There'll be an aftermarket in redesigning dashboards. You can order a 1960s dashboard, a 1980s dashboard. Thomas, what do you see? What do you hope will happen in the near future?
Well, I started to describe the technology of using computer vision to identify pain. And the point here is that we know how to do this. So a human can just go and observe patients and fill out a checklist. And it works very well. Policies in place only require facilities to do this once every 3 months, which is insufficient. We go back to the facilities, we say, we'd like you to do this every week. And the facilities say, we'd love to, but we can't. That's where our technology comes in, because it can do something that no human can do, which is the possibility of being able to monitor pain expressions 24 hours a day, even under poor lighting conditions. And that's one of our goals, to make it work under poor lighting. So I could describe this and other technologies that we're working on in more detail, but there is something that I think is far more important for right now. People here in the panel develop all kinds of things. We develop things, Frank, Allison, they're all involved in development. How many of these things have you heard if you're not part of AgeWell? Probably none of them or very little of them. So how do we go to tell people that this is out there, and how can we get that stuff in people's homes? I started writing articles about that, and I started to give seminars about that, and nothing was happening. So frustrated, I turned to social media. I learned that it takes 17 years to implement clinical findings into practice. 17 years. The people I work with will not be around in 17 years to benefit from solutions that are available today. So one of the ways we use technology now is to capitalize on social media to push the message. We're specifically focusing on the problem of pain and dementia, but we got to think of new ways reliant on technology to spread that message out. Our campaign, by the way, is See Pain More Clearly. It's our hashtag. Use it. It's going to help us, because we're also doing scientific evaluations of the dissemination effort. So that's my main point, in addition to the brief description of technology, that we got to get that message out, and we got to do it in a new way, because the old ways, the seminars, the workshops, don't work well.
That's such an important thing to say. And, you know, as somebody who's been involved in communication one way or the other for a very long time, I see this as a huge challenge, you know, because you talk about social media. Well, are the people that you really want to reach habitués of social media? I suspect that relatively a smaller percentage of them than you'd like are. And you know, just getting, there's still stigma, there's a lot of things to deal with, but that is such an important point.
Yeah.
Allison.
But Jay, that's exactly why CABI was formed, was to address that gap in translation that Thomas was mentioning. So there's all this great work that's done in terms of research and early development of innovations. And then there was this gap in how do we get that work adopted, and what's keeping it from getting adopted. You need to have large scale tests showing that it's acceptable to the groups that you're working with. And you need to have a channels for distribution of this. And we are trained as scientists, and we're not trained as CEOs or marketers. And so, you know, it's often in the university settings and often in the hospital settings, if you've got an innovation, you're told, okay, well, if you want to do something with it, go off and find some funders, but that's not what we're trained in. I'm trained. I can't. Maybe I shouldn't speak for Frank and Thomas and Karen, but I'm trained in neuroscience. I'm not trained in business, right? Although I've learned a lot of it along the way. But CABI actually helps to sort of bridge those connections. And LEAP, our new platform that we've just got launched in beta, and it'll launch formally later in early 2022. The whole point of that is to connect all of these different communities together. So we have the communities of older adults who are at risk for and living with dementia, and their caregivers who can be advising innovators, but we're also really well connected with venture capitalist firms and other solution accelerators and so on and so forth. We're also connected with long-term care centers and senior centers around the world. So we can actually get people's innovations into these markets, have them tested and validated, and then get the first sales in, and then help to get additional funding and so on. There is still a huge gap there. I mean, CABI can't do everything itself, and we work very closely, I should say, in partnership, obviously, with AgeWell and other groups like CCNA and others. I think we all share this common goal to make sure that what we're doing is not wasting a penny of taxpayer money. There's a lot of money invested in making sure the research is done. We want to make sure that every potential for impact is going to have impact as well. And we don't really have all those systems in place. But if I can pivot to just the other question that you were asking, is that okay, in terms of technologies? Sure. There's in the chat, there's been a lot of mention that's come up over the course of our discussion around virtual reality, VR, AR, augmented reality, XR. I really see all of these as having huge potential in every element of dementia prevention, detection, and care going forward. And I would don't have time to go into all of those, but one personal example for me is just thinking back of both of my grandmothers had dementia. One had it a little bit earlier in her 70s, and one not until her 90s. But the one who was in her 70s lived in New York. And as you may know, the money in New York used to be and is predominantly still all green, all looks the same. She lived in Manhattan, and she got to the point where her vision problems were making it hard for her to go shopping, because she couldn't remember, you'd have to how many ones do I have? How many fives, and so on. And so because she couldn't see so well, she stopped going out so much because she felt like she kept getting ripped off. And then it was more stress on her memory system. And she became socially isolated, which we know is a risk for dementia, and things spiral from there. And I just can't help thinking, if there had been some way for her to overcome the vision problem from the very beginning, then maybe she wouldn't have deteriorated as quickly, because if there's a system that can use artificial vision combined with augmented reality, for example, and she could see right away on her glasses, how much money did she have, or what is this bill that you're giving? And there are systems out there that can do that now. Maybe she would have maintained those relationships. And we do know, for example, from our own work, that vision changes can be a predictor of dementia. We don't actually know why, but using virtual reality in that way is one way. And then on the very end, other side of things, giving people comfort while they're in long-term care. We're helping people, train empathy for caregivers. There's a great company called Embodied Labs that does that kind of empathy training work for caregivers. It has a lot of potential. And I think if you combine it with things like artificial intelligence and machine vision and so on, sky's the limit.
Well, you only need watch or remember watching that documentary about bringing iPods to people in long-term care homes and playing music that they're familiar with, and the potential impact that could have. Like, there's no, this discussion shows there is honestly no discernible limit to the number of technologies that either are being developed, have been developed, or will be. And I think we'd all agree that the impact is going to be fantastic. We have about 5 minutes. I would like to just go around once more and say, many of the people who are watching this, I'm sure, have been struck by the richness of this conversation and would like to know how they might get involved, how they might help with this effort to mobilize the technology, get it in the hands of the right people. What can they do, or where could they go to learn more? Karen, I'll start with you.
In essence, to learn more, I suppose you would just have to look at what AgeWell is doing right now, because they have, their excellent stories of what has actually been approved and has been rolled out. Getting back to the previous questions, I didn't get a chance to speak. What I would like to see going forward is, we talk about aging well, but we don't talk about dying well. And that's kind of missed in this dementia talk, that eventually we're all going to die one day. And it's a taboo topic, especially on diagnosis, because we know there's no cure, but it's a very relevant discussion, and especially in the home. So there's not much information or research or even technology to help somebody in palliative care, that journey of end of life and all of that stuff that is involved. So I'd like to see more technology or research done on that, the end of life. Like, I believe you can die well in the comfort of your own home. It's very difficult to get somebody with dementia in hospice because you don't know what the length of time is. My mom was in palliative care for 5 years, to put it in perspective. So because of that, I think we need more, that's an area we need to focus on as well.
Frank, if people want to get involved or find out more, what would be the best, most streamlined way to do that?
Well, I will always encourage people to contact their local researchers directly. So the universities, the research institutes, the Baycrest, the Brières, each city has a center where they're doing research on aging, and I would recommend just reach out and volunteer. We need volunteers. We need people that are willing to test some of these new technologies, and we need feedback from the people that are going to use it. So yes, volunteer to your local research department.
I like that. Allison.
I know we're running out of time, so I'm putting a bunch of resources into the chat. I would second Frank's comments, talk to local researchers, get involved. There's also a lot of seniors community groups, and the other links that I put into the chat are for CABI. You can get more information about CABI there, and we can connect you with people. We've sponsored over 350 different innovations over the last several years. Many of them have now been adopted and moved into society. So you can see those there, but we can also, if you've got ideas, we're always looking for new ideas. And I also put a link in for LEAP, which is our new platform that, as I said before, is in beta, which will just connect people and help you form your ideas, help you inform other people's ideas and create that sense of community. And Karen, just for you, I put in a link to a podcast on palliative care as well. So that's the other thing. I think people there's so much information on the interwebs. Check out interesting podcasts like Jay, you've got some really interesting podcasts, and we can always learn more by sharing information through all of these different resources. So I'll put more resources in the chat.
Thank you, Allison. And Thomas.
I'll give a grimmer look. I don't believe there is a good centralized place to get that information, and that is a problem. I think AgeWell, that might be an opportunity for you, AgeWell, for us, AgeWell, to create that resource. I don't believe there is a good centralized place. My closing sentences, two of them. To solve these problems with dementia, we got to think both inside the box and outside the box. Inside the box are the medical sciences, outside the box are the technologies. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you all, Allison, Thomas, Frank, Karen. Two things, stay tuned for the AgeWell National Impact Challenge. You'll find the link for that on the Whova app. And as we shut down this section, we'd like to leave you with a short video about social robots and how they can help people living with cognitive impairment. This work, fascinating work, funded by AgeWell and by the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, Abby. Thank you all. It was a great panel.
We're developing social robots to help prompt older adults through activities of daily living. My background's in robotics, and I was really looking at different applications to apply robots. The interaction between people and robots, and healthcare is a really interesting area where you can use technology to support people. A social robot is a robot that interacts naturally with people, so using exactly the same way as we communicate, facial expressions, our speech, even vocal intonation and body language. We're targeting the user groups that are living with cognitive impairment, so the robot is there to help with the prompting of the steps of the activity, because sometimes they may forget, what the sequence of steps are. So the idea is we want to promote independence. So robots prompt people to do the activities of daily living instead of doing it for them. Activities such as meal preparation, meal eating, and we're working on dressing right now, exercise. Our social robots are being designed to support caregivers in that circle of care. So the robots can do the low-level kind of repetitive tasks over and over again and leave the high-level functioning tasks to the caregivers and the one-on-one tasks. So with Ageable support, we've been able to bring together a team of caregivers, older adults, as well as industry partners, including our industrial partner Crosswing, to develop these technology, like next generation technology and really innovation. So our overall objective with developing these social robots is really to develop technology that older adults can use to age in place, improve their quality of life, as well as promote independence so that they can really enjoy life as they age.